On this edition of The Fifth Estate.
Draisaitl looking for victory. McDavid back to Draisaitl. Game over!
For decades, betting on a single sports event in Canada was against the law.
Bill C-218, an act to amend the criminal code, sports betting.
Not anymore.
What you end up here with is a message that gambling is not just acceptable, but desirable.
Now it's like being trapped in an advertising firestorm.
This is your shot.
Ads irresistible to the most vulnerable gamblers.
An industry that is preying on individuals and pushing them until it's taken every penny it can from them.
It was only after he died that we found out how much they'd got the hoops into him.
And there are questions about a Canadian sports betting industry poised to make billions.
Are you comfortable with impressionable young people hearing that message?
I don't think any company's out targeting young people.
I'm with the Fifth Estate at the CBC.
All right.
Can you explain why you chose to make this deal with Bet99? I'm Bob McKeown in Toronto. For Canadian sports fans, recent months have been as good as they get. From the World Cup of Soccer to World Junior Hockey, from the last Grey Cup to the next Super Bowl. And all at a time when there is sports gambling in Canada as never before. And then all those gambling ads on TV, on billboards, in the subway, even in the middle of games. As we'll show you, it can be a dangerous, even deadly combination. This is the Fifth Estate. April 4th, 2022, and the Toronto Stock Exchange celebrates a big change in Canadian gambling.
Thank you for joining us. My name is Paul Burns. I'm President and CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association.
It is now lawful in Canada to make bets on single sporting events online, and Ontario became the first province to allow private betting companies into that game.
As of today, there'll be no more gray market. In Ontario, only black. So yes, it is a very good day for this.
You would be happy too if you had just got access to the Canadian sports betting market, estimated to be worth as much as $14 billion a year, and growing. For decades in Canada, legal betting meant a trip to the racetrack or to the casino, or putting your money on the government-run sports bets called parlays, in which you make 2 or more wagers, but only get paid if you win them all. Until now, if Canadians wanted to gamble on one race, or one fight, or one game, it meant going to the so-called gray or unregulated market.
Organized crime really had their talons in this, and were they all pure beneficiaries of it.
Brian Massey is NDP MP for the border city of Windsor, Ontario. With competing casinos on both sides of the Canada-US border and all the jobs they bring, Massey and others had been pushing for legalized sports betting for over a decade.
It was about basically trying to rein in organized crime that was getting, upwards of $10 billion of this, and also the offshore accounts that were doing lucrative business with no money going back to taxpayers and no accountability.
But for years, virtually every professional league, NHL, NFL, NBA, and MLB, opposed that change. National Hockey League Commissioner Gary Bettman was among those speaking out against the expansion of gambling. He said the atmosphere the league wants to create at hockey games is inconsistent with sports betting. Bettman added, "I don't think you need a study to tell you that. I think if you're in touch with your games and your fans, you understand it." But that approach didn't work.
Breaking news: the Supreme Court this morning striking down the federal ban on sports betting.
That decision in Washington, D.C. would pave the way for legal sports betting south of the border.
It was a fait accompli at that point in time.
So Canadians now had a legal option for placing sports bets: American casinos.
we then become the only North American and one of the last G7 countries not to have legal sports betting.
The rules around betting on sporting events in Canada will soon be relaxed.
And then, in 2021, a private member's bill passed Parliament, legalizing single-event sports betting in Canada.
Provinces and territories will be able to offer single-event sport betting products, like wagering on the Grey Cup, Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals, or the Super Bowl.
This one I feel strongly about that we've done the right thing. The question now is how we respond to that. So if we respond appropriately to it, I know it's a better situation.
So how should governments in Canada respond to that brave new world of online sports betting? When the industry made its primetime debut, it triggered what one critic called a tsunami of gambling ads.
Shouldn't you be golfing?
From billboards to subways, and most of all, the TV commercials.
Ooh, yeah.
First in Ontario, then coast to coast. But that's not all.
We're back, Cabral Richards, Andy McNeil.
Once, intermissions at halftime or between periods meant highlights and game analysis.
Tampa Bay has won 8 games in a row at home in the playoffs. 90% of the bets are on the over 6 goals.
Now, no matter where you live in Canada, you'll see something like this.
Quick question for everyone. Over-under on Andrew Harris and Banks having 150 yards total from the line of scrimmage. Over-under. Combined.
Oh, I'm taking over.
You're taking over. You're taking over.
Yeah.
And it's all brought something else. Celebrities hired as so-called gambling brand ambassadors. Actors and athletes, including 2 of the best players in the National Hockey League, Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews. And then, of course, there's Wayne Gretzky.
BetMGM is here. And with a tap, you're betting with the king of sportsbooks.
The recent Gretzky commercials for BetMGM have been a flashpoint in the sports betting debate. One editorial asked, "Why is Wayne Gretzky telling me to gamble?" Another headline read, "Wayne Gretzky destroys his legacy with amoral commercial." The question is, are Canadians ready for the problems that inevitably will come with legalized gambling? For an answer, we've come to Great Britain, where they've been living with legalized gambling and its problems for a decade and a half. Is this where Canadians can find a glimpse of our future and the gamblification of Canada?
If you consider the Gretzky case much like so many other athletes, what you end up here with is a message that gambling is not just acceptable, but desirable for an entire generation.
Dara McGee is a lecturer at the University of Bath, about 200 kilometres west of London.
I think probably like a lot of Catholic nationalist communities, my perception of gambling was shaped by my family. My grandmother certainly would warn you against it.
Born in Ireland, McGee attended the University of Toronto, where he was captain of the men's soccer team and an all-star.
In my case, a love of sport certainly played a big part, and in particular, my belief that sport is something that's culturally valued, culturally valuable, and something to be cherished.
Today, he studies and teaches the impact of sports gambling on young men in the UK.
A lot of them struggle to get through 90 minutes without having a bet on the game. It speaks to the way in which gambling has hardwired itself into sport in ways that have altered our very experience of sport. And I think there's a real danger that gamblification of what sport is has altered the fan experience for an entire generation to come.
Everyone knows the key to success is having a great game plan.
But did you know that a game plan is also the key to responsible gambling?
Dara McGee says the betting industry is sending its own message.
Every bettor has a system. Make FanDuel's responsible gaming tools a key part of yours.
Responsible gaming. a phrase you'll hear and see both in the UK and Canada.
No, I just use FanDuel's responsible gaming tools like time and spending limits to manage my play.
That's the system.
Hasn't failed me yet.
There's growing recognition that that responsible gambling discourse unfairly imposes responsibility on individuals rather than on very powerful corporations. It's unquestionably an industry-friendly framework, and I think that's why we've seen it so popularly adopted from the UK context into the US, and I think now also in Canada.
Live betting on FanDuel Sportsbook. You can play here.
When we come back, are those powerful gambling companies targeting people they know are already addicted?
Live betting is like the most predatory version of sports betting.
And when sports betting turns deadly.
They're like spiders enticing the fly into the lure. That's what the betting industry does, and that's what the betting industry will do in Canada.
In 2021, Canada opened the floodgates to online sports betting after a loosening of the federal law. So far, 27 sports betting websites have signed up in Ontario, the first province to allow private companies in on the action. And it's not hard to join. Supply personal details, upload ID and credit information, and that's about it. Then pick a sport, choose a team, and make a bet. Some betting companies even throw in free cash to seal the deal.
The problem is what gambling does is it almost creates this like primal urge and this belief that you are capable of like predicting something that frankly no one really can.
This young man describes himself as someone who's addicted to gambling.
Hi, Bob. Hey, nice to meet you.
Come on over. For now, he's asked to remain in the shadows, concerned about the labels often attached to addiction.
You made it clear that you didn't want to be identified.
My fear is with a story like this, that the stigma of or having a gambling addiction might be simply enough to be written off entirely.
He's in his 20s, lives with his girlfriend, and has a good job. He began gambling, betting in video games.
How old were you when gambling became an issue in your life?
Probably 15 or 16, something like that, yeah.
And what was the point at which this had the control and influence over you that one thinks of when you use the word addiction?
You know, I won some money, and it was a lot of money, and then lost it all very quickly. And in that period of time, you go through a lot of emotions, and one of them is like that realization that like this is a problem.
But then the cycle repeats.
That's the addictive part of it, is that there's like an adrenaline rush. That's what I feel. And it's, frankly, at points it feels like insanity.
Insanity, he calls it, amplified by the opportunities to bet on sports that are now all around him.
When it comes to sports betting, there's a real sense of like camaraderie among people doing it. That's the part that makes it even more difficult to quit. And that's the attraction to it.
So attracted by a sense of community, but also new types of betting that experts say target vulnerable gamblers. It's called live betting.
With live betting on FanDuel Sportsbook, you can play here as fast as they play here all game long.
It's live, it's immersive, it's continuous. You start to see this take hold of the entire experience of consuming the game.
There's a sense of urgency, a primal sort of rush to get it in, to get the bet in before the odds shift out of my favor. Live betting is like the most predatory version of sports betting.
And that certainly alters the fan experience in a very profound way, and can, for many, I think, lead to harm.
Liverpool, the UK port city famous for the Beatles and British football. And for a young Premier League supporter, a great place to grow up. Ryan Myers was a devoted, lifelong fan of the Liverpool Football Club, one of Britain's great soccer franchises. But as time went on, his support for the Reds would not only be a matter of cheering on the hometown team, but of getting involved with new, riskier ways to bet.
These days, kids go into a football ground, first thing they see is the adverts when they're going in there.
John and Alison Myers knew their son Ryan liked to bet, but they had no idea how far it had gone. Then they saw this email he had sent to an online casino. My name is Ryan Myers. I woke up this morning to find out I've pretty much emptied my bank account and don't even remember doing it. I know I don't deserve it and can understand if you don't do it, but I was wondering if you could find in your heart to maybe somehow refund some of what I deposited last night, and then ban me. But it was already too late to help Ryan.
So, when on the day he died, somebody noticed a betting slip on the floor. When they picked up the betting slip, his card had been declined. It was only after he died that we started looking into it, that we found out how much they'd got the hooks into him.
According to the gambling industry, people like Ryan Myers fail to bet responsibly. His father calls that a brazen attempt to blame the addicts instead of the industry that addicts them.
It's all your fault, it's all your fault. Not the fact that we've been sending you texts and emails offering you free bets. Like with our Ryan, if he tried to stop, right, you could guarantee that within a few days, the text would start coming.
Incredibly, John says, those betting offers kept arriving, even after Ryan's death.
They're like spiders enticing the fly into the lure. That's what the betting industry does, and that's what the betting industry will do in Canada.
They have created an immersive, repetitive, very fast-paced gambling environment, which is very dangerous, but very profitable.
Will Prohaska is a director with the UK-based charity called Gambling with Lives. Generally speaking, Will, what's the target audience?
For a gambling operator, most of them are still targeting young men.
Prohaska's group is one that no parent wants to join. Its members have lost a loved one to gambling addiction, then suicide.
What we're seeing is an industry that is preying on individuals and pushing them and pushing them and pushing them until it's taken every penny it can from them and then leaving them in a mental health disaster.
Indeed, the facts in the UK are startling. In 2021, there were 1.4 million gambling addicts there, while a 2019 study found 55,000 addicts under the age of 16. And 86% of the earnings from gambling in the UK come from just 5% of the customers.
The predatory industry, who for me is grooming young children into the next generation of addicts, because they need addicts.
I suspect they don't understand the damage that they're doing.
And Will Prohaska is no fan of celebrities as gambling ambassadors.
And they will have been offered enormous sums of money to, I think, sully their own reputations in the interest of profit for the gambling operators. I suspect history will judge them very harshly.
Especially when you consider this. A landmark study in the UK in 2021 found that every year, on average, more than 400 addicted gamblers die by suicide. It was big news, and the betting industry came under attack, with calls for an investigation and for change. Prohaska says Canadians should brace themselves.
What you will now see is you'll see two sides to this. You'll see a gambling industry which is now much more profitable and therefore more powerful. And on the other side of that, you'll see a significant increase in people who are suffering addiction and people who are suffering lower level harms, and you will see a higher death count.
In Ontario, responsibility for regulating sports betting belongs to the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario. We took a look at their new rules to see how Ontario is protecting gamblers. Those rules explicitly state they're written with a high level of generality to give gambling companies the flexibility to determine what works best for their business.
Industry self-regulation generally means that commercial needs are privileged over those of consumer protection and ultimately public health.
Bath University's Dara McGee says the UK took a similar hands-off regulatory approach, and he's got a warning for Canada.
I would implore them to consider the lessons from the UK context, where increasingly there's a recognition that industry self-regulation doesn't work.
Which is why the UK just introduced a major change, banning ads with sports and TV stars. In other words, in the UK today, no Gretzky, McDavids, or Matthews. We'd hoped to speak with the Ontario regulators. Instead, the Alcohol and Gaming Commission sent us a written statement listing initiatives they say they've taken. Among them, banning the mass advertising of bonuses to players, monitoring players' behavior for signs of problem gambling, then intervention when problems are detected. Operators must also allow players to put limits on the time and money they spend on gambling sites, and must provide help and resources 24/7. Will Prohaska says the gambling industry's approach in both Britain and Canada is a familiar ring.
We saw in 1950s across the world tobacco companies resisting the link between tobacco and causing lung cancer or other illnesses. It's the link between the product and the health harm. And that's where we are in this fight against the gambling industry now. We're sort of where the tobacco fight was maybe 50 years ago.
But it's not just addiction. When we return, the link between sports betting and match fixing.
It's head-scratchingly simple. Change the criminal code to make match fixing illegal.
And the first time that Canada went to the World Cup.
It's in! Canada has gone in!
A few of them were offered bribes to throw games. We had the meeting, and that's when I became aware of it.
Along with the legalization of sports betting in Canada comes the risk of corruption that gambling can bring with it.
Phoenix Coyotes assistant coach Rick Tocchet faces charges that he helped run a multi-million-dollar illegal sports betting operation with alleged links to organized crime.
In 2006, the NHL faced a betting scandal that would entangle some familiar names.
In one 40-day period, authorities said, the ring processed $1.7 million in bets.
Tocchet's boss was none other than his friend, Wayne Gretzky, then the Coyotes' head coach and part owner. And after the 2006 Super Bowl, there was this.
Actress Janet Jones, Gretzky's wife, is alleged to have made hundreds of thousands of dollars in bets, including a $5,000 bet on this coin toss.
We've heard that your wife may also be involved with that.
Oh, really? I don't know.
For the Gretzkys, it would go from bad to worse.
The Associated Press is reporting that a wiretap recording reveals Gretzky discussing how his wife Janet could avoid being implicated. The phone conversation is with Rick Tocchet.
In the end, no bettors were criminally charged because the betting itself wasn't illegal. Running the gambling ring was.
Are you pleading guilty freely and voluntarily?
Yes, sir.
There was never the suggestion Wayne or Janet Gretzky did anything illegal. But when it was over, the Great One made his views about gambling very clear.
I didn't bet. Didn't happen. It's not going to happen. Hasn't happened. It's not something that I've done.
In 2006, the names of other bettors rumored to be NHL players never came out. Rick Tocchet insisted he didn't place bets on hockey. But the reason for concern is obvious: to keep players and coaches from betting on games they're in a position to influence. It's called match fixing. And few know more about that than the international sports data company called Sport Radar. Their clients include virtually every name brand in the wide world of sport.
In 2022, we've actually reported on suspicious matches from over 70 countries.
Tom Mace is Sport Radar's Director of Global Operations. At their nerve center in London, they're bombarded daily with billions of real-time data points and the bets made on them from around the world.
In 2021, we in fact detected and reported on our highest ever number of suspicious matches in a calendar year at 904, and in 2022 we've surpassed that number with currently 943 matches having been detected and reported as highly suspicious.
Their statistics show that as legalized gambling has increased, so has illegal match fixing, even in what might seem an unlikely place, Canada.
Specifically, some years ago, around about 2012 to 2015, there were well-documented integrity concerns around the Canadian Soccer League.
In fact, the CBC broke that story in 2012.
3 years ago tonight, at a Canadian Soccer League match, no one in the stands suspected what was really happening on the pitch or how the low-level game was being influenced from thousands of kilometers away.
Specifically, a crime syndicate in Berlin was manipulating games in the Canadian Soccer League, the CSL, a semi-pro league in Canada.
And they're off the radar, and links to Eastern European organised crime and match fixing.
And Fred Lord should know. He spent much of his law enforcement career monitoring the murky world of match fixing, including the Canadian Soccer League.
So we decided to invest some funds and monitor the entire season in 2015 to get a proper understanding of what was actually going on. From our analysis, we had about 60 matches that appeared to have significant betting fraud activity around that, which is somewhat 43% of the actual competition itself.
According to Sport Radar's figures, that means the fixer's profit could have been $9 million in a league which paid its players perhaps a few $100s a game.
When you're not being paid, or you're being paid very low, you become low-hanging fruit for organised crime.
And when the investigation into the Canadian Soccer League ended, the conclusion was that the CSL had no legitimate business or sporting purpose, that it was operated solely for international betting and fraud. That was in 2015. According to a more recent report, the CSL has since cleaned up its act.
Beginning of the second half, 45 minutes.
Now, we'll tell you the unfortunate story of Canada's first World Cup, as we reported it over 3 decades ago.
And Mike Sweeney chipping it forward. Ridge going forward, getting his head to it, hits the post.
With 3 games, 3 losses, no goals, the 1986 World Cup in Mexico would be forgettable for Canada. What happened next was not. Afterwards, the Canadians had an international tournament in Singapore.
A few of them were offered bribes to throw games. I wasn't personally, but we had the meeting, and that's when I became aware of it.
Canadian Paul James and 4 teammates were offered $15,000 US apiece to lose the semi-final to North Korea, with half the money up front.
I don't even know if it was 7.5. I was told it was 7.5.
Did you count it?
I didn't count it, no. But it was a bundle of, I mean, I've never seen money like that before.
And the fix seemed to pay off. North Korea won 2-0. But the next day, Paul James gave his money back.
I just threw it on the bed, you know, and
what did you say?
Whew, well, I said a lot of things. I mean, I really, you know, I had an emotional outburst.
What happened in Singapore might have stayed in Singapore, if not for Paul James' conscience. Back home, he spoke to the RCMP, then to the Fifth Estate.
I could never throw a game for Canada, you know, and I can't believe that we've let Canada down.
In the end, not a single member of the men's national soccer team who accepted bribes to fix that 1986 match was convicted. And the same goes for Canadians involved in the CSL betting scandal. And the reason why may come as a shock.
In Canada, almost unbelievably, match fixing is not illegal. There's lots of, woolly words around it, but fundamentally, it's not illegal.
Declan Hill is a former Fifth Estate journalist.
This kind of corruption going on between two teams and selling and buying stuff is absolutely classic.
With a PhD from Oxford, Hill is now a professor at the University of New Haven in Connecticut, focusing on sports integrity issues.
There have been convictions, and match fixers know that, and they're basing themselves in our country. Just want to show you what that was.
In 2019, Hill was invited to a symposium held by the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport. It produced recommendations for Canada. Among them, review the Canadian Criminal Code and make amendments for the prosecution of match manipulation in Canadian sport.
It's head-scratchingly simple to start the process of protecting Canadians and Canadian sport. Change the criminal code, just one paragraph to make match fixing illegal.
And it's not as if Canadian authorities hadn't been warned.
Had the opportunity to fly over to Ottawa and Toronto and actually brief the financial crime team on the actual case of the CSL, so that we sort of handed over our intelligence holdings to the RCMP so they can actually give them a heads up on what's actually going on.
People here are working 24/7.
What's more, if the Canadian government needed help, that top sports data and integrity firm, SportRadar, was offering it.
So I have a team of over 50 global betting analysts working to identify and report on suspicious and likely manipulated matches to our partners.
A list of SportRadar's partners includes government and law enforcement agencies from around the world, but no mention of Canada. Canada's Justice Minister David Lametti declined an interview, but his press secretary sent a statement saying the criminal code does contain provisions which may capture scenarios such as match fixing and sports corruption. But the fact remains, there is no specific law prohibiting match fixing in Canada. And according to Declan Hill, nor has a match fixer ever been convicted here. For now, it seems provincial regulators will just have to do what they can. At the end of last year, first Ontario and then Alberta banned betting on UFC fights after concerns about match fixing. Alberta has since lifted its ban after promises of change. Still, one way or the other, Hill says the bettors always seem to be the losers.
This legalization of sports gambling is effectively like the end of prohibition in America in the 1930s. It will be a sweeping, wide-scale social phenomenon that will fundamentally transform Canadian society. And the Canadian politicians have simply not shown themselves to be ready to tackle it.
After the break, how did we get from this?
I didn't bet. Didn't happen. It's not going to happen.
To this.
With every tap, a new legend is born. Because every bet with BetMGM has a potential for greatness.
Oh yeah, open-toe cowboy boots. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we in Vegas. Game time in 20. Bet slip is empty. I gotta call KG.
It's the spring of 2022, and one of the most recognizable names in Las Vegas gambling has signaled it's headed north to Canada.
Gretzky, what's up, baby? Come on, man. I need some tips.
Jamie, you want a tip?
Yeah.
No.
Son of a
BetMGM would be among the first slate of sports betting operators to launch in Ontario.
What sets BetMGM apart?
Well, we ride on the coattails of what MGM has done before. You know, that goes without saying. You know, MGM as a brand, pool parties at MGM properties are a thing.
Oh, yeah. I've seen them up front, up close.
Earlier that year, BetMGM CEO Adam Greenblatt was in Toronto for Canada's annual gaming conference.
Let's talk a little bit about the start here in Ontario. You've raced to the top very quickly. Tell me a little bit about how that journey has gone.
Looking into the Ontario example, we've had to start from scratch, really. And so 8 weeks in, and we're delighted with the progress we're making.
So what's not to be delighted about? Greenblatt later revealed his company recorded 70 million transactions in its first full month operating in Canada. And in the US in 2022, sports betting wagers totaled nearly $80 billion, up from just $13 billion in 2019. It's predicted Canadian wagering will grow to as much as $28 billion. And consider this. In the spring of 2022, Ontario had 18 internet gaming operators. Today, there are 67. And guess who's gone from skeptic to convert? Remember, in 2012, NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman announced that gambling and the atmosphere of hockey simply didn't mix. That was then. This is now.
Today, the NHL and MGM are proud to announce MGM as an official gaming partner of the NHL.
You have kind of been against this. In a deposition, you said in 2012 that it just didn't match with the game and kind of opposed the family-friendly atmosphere you're looking for. What changed?
The Supreme Court, but more importantly, to the extent this may provide a vehicle for more fan engagement and connectivity to the game, it's something that we had to embrace.
And the NHL's announcement was soon followed by an NBA gambling deal. Then an about-face from the NFL.
Money talks in sport, and I think in this case more than most. And I think there is this tension between the moral claims of a lot of key stakeholders in the sporting world in the past and what happens when the money is placed on the table.
The CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association is Paul Burns, whose group represents BetMGM and more than a dozen other sports betting companies operating in Canada. The unrelenting avalanche of television commercials or billboards or other advertising, has that been something you expected?
We knew that there would be more advertising because it's permitted. There's a regulated gaming market now in Ontario.
You had families of every age watching those hockey games and being bombarded. Does that have an impact on young people in that it normalizes gambling?
Well, I think that in terms of, that's why the constraints were put around what can be advertised, and in terms of, there's been long history of rules around not focusing on minors, not ads that would direct at children or create lifestyle ideas about gaming. There's lots of restrictions and regulations around what can be advertised.
But the best young players in the National Hockey League today, active players, Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews, saying, I bet and you should too, to kids of all ages.
And that's why we're encouraging everybody to say, understand the responsibility we have here. This is a product that is directed at adults.
But there's no control when a family is watching the Avalanche in the Stanley Cup Finals.
No, and that's
the gambling.
People change the channel if they don't want, and people will change the channel. I know people that do that. Yeah. I mean, I don't need to see, and you can pick the ads. Whether it's gambling ads now, or it's something else coming later.
The one ad that seems to have triggered the most controversy is the BetMGM ad fronted by Wayne Gretzky. Are you uncomfortable with that, as some Canadians are?
No, it's people make choices on things they want to do and like to do. Wayne Gretzky is obviously a known sports fan. I don't know if anybody under 30 ever saw him play in
They
Canada,
still know who he is.
But they know who he is. And the point being is that, and that's where the choice that he's made and the brand has made, that to encourage betting. It's about signing a product and affiliation, and the companies have the right to do that. I don't think any company's out intentionally trying to do anything untoward towards influencing or targeting young people.
Yeah. We've spoken to a number of people who are involved on the care for the victims side who believe that the ads are targeting those who have shown problems with addiction.
I don't believe that to be true.
Why not?
Any gaming operator I've ever talked to, they're not looking to build their business on the backs of problem gamblers. They don't want that kind of relationship with a customer. They want a healthy relationship with the customer. They want the player to understand that play within your means, play with a budget, use it for entertainment. It's not a way to make a living. It's not a way to make money. It's a form of entertainment, and we want you to use it that way. And that's what we want.
You want to go, Gretz?
Of course, we wanted to ask Connor McDavid and Wayne Gretzky about their controversial commercials as brand ambassadors for BetMGM, but we didn't get a response. We did, however, manage to catch up with another sports betting brand ambassador, Bet99's Austin Matthews, after a recent Maple Leafs practice.
I'm with the Fifth Estate at the CBC. Can you explain why you chose to make this deal with Bet99?
I appreciate the question, but after all that, I don't think I'm going to get into it much, honestly. So if you guys got any more hockey-related questions, then...
Though his contract as brand ambassador is reported to be for 3 years and at least $1 million, Matthews seemed reluctant to discuss sports betting with us.
They hired you to be an ambassador for the brand. I just wanted to give you the opportunity.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I've already kind of answered this question before.
In announcing their partnership, Matthews tweeted he's proud and excited to represent Bet99. However, to us, he said he'd rather talk hockey.
It's just, a lot of hockey questions and stuff, so I kind of just like to keep on that if that's okay, and if not, we can just move forward.
And this young man, who's addicted to gambling, wants to move forward too, though it seems some online gambling operators aren't quite ready to let him go.
It's sickening, yeah. I check my email a lot, and I still get a lot of emails, even though I've blocked them. Like, it's frustrating, and you want to like take action because it's like you thought you did everything you needed to be like enough is enough, but you're being like taunted.
And there's a message also for sports stars turned brand ambassadors, like Matthews, McDavid, and Gretzky.
With every tap, a new legend is born.
To me, it cheapens the legacy.
Even one of those responsible for the legalization of single-event sports betting in Canada is disappointed by what he's seen.
I think about the fact that you have, kids that sit down with their parents and their other family members, and they're inundated during the game about betting on the people that they're watching on the screen. And I think that there needs to be some regulation with regards to that, and common sense should stop some of this.
In a 2021 newspaper interview, Wayne Gretzky said it's a different time, different era, that online betting is part of the world today. Perhaps, but what has not changed are the facts about gambling addiction today and the toll that it takes on people and lives.
When people get lured into online gambling, there's no legendary status. Often there's destitution, debt, misery, anxiety, depression, mental health harm, and death.